The film opens, and we see a speculative financier named Kevin gather. It turns out the bank he works for has recently fallen, leaving him jobless. He also lost his stock and all his assets, so he is now distressed and sitting in a bar. Minutes later, a woman named Molly comes up to him and comments that he's the most miserable person she's ever seen. Irritated, Kevin asks her to leave, but she continues talking to him. He soon discovers that Molly is playing a game with her friends, who sent her as a challenge to ask him out. My hope for the future is looking kind of bleak, but my pants are feeling kind of tight, she jokes. Following this, the two begin discussing their lives, and Kevin becomes interested in her. He then decides to take the opportunity and asks Molly out on a proper date. She is taken aback since she was only messing with him as part of the game, but when she realizes he's serious, she accepts his invitation. The scene then shifts to many years later, where we see the two now married. I guess it didn't bother her that he was penniless, as anyway, their marriage is strained due to their son's sudden disappearance. Molly has become an alcoholic, and Kevin isn't doing well either. He works at a desk job he hates, where his boss often bullies him. I still can't find your son, Kevin. You numbnuts. One day, Kevin is called by his boss, who scolds him for his poor performance and hints that he might soon be fired. A frustrated Kevin then heads outside and gets into his car, where he receives a call from Molly. She scolds him for failing to pay the monthly bills, and the two begin to argue. At this moment, another car suddenly appears and crashes into Kevin's vehicle, rendering him unconscious. Sometime later, Kevin wakes up in an alley and sees an older man before him. This man introduces himself as the benefactor, which makes Kevin laugh. However, the benefactor says he's serious and has a job for him. He then takes Kevin to a street where there are remarkably no cars or people nearby, much like a post-apocalyptic world. When Kevin asks where everyone went, the benefactor reveals that he's the one who moved them. He further explains that he has actually moved Kevin to another reality and that they are now in a parallel universe. Following this, the two go to a CF where Kevin sees that everyone is afraid of the benefactor. A waitress named Tina comes to serve them, but the benefactor forces her to eat some food. The poor girl has no choice but to comply with his orders. He then explains that for every choice a person makes, there are infinite alternate realities where different choices play out. These decisions create infinite possibilities, meaning that everything a person can imagine exists somewhere, at some point in time. He then reveals that there is a power capable of moving people between these realities. After this, the benefactor offers Kevin a job as one of his shifters in exchange for his dream life. These are people who have given up their souls and now work to trouble other souls by shifting them to different realities. The benefactor reveals that all other versions of Kevin have accepted this deal, and even Molly has been shifted twice. However, Kevin is skeptical and asks him to prove it by shifting Tina elsewhere. The benefactor agrees and activates a device on his wrist called the Deviator. Tina begins crying and begs him not to do it, but he swiftly shifts her to another universe where her parents never met and she was never born. Kevin is shocked, and when he sees Tina's parents crying, he feels terrible for his actions as he fracking should. What on earth, Kevin? It also finally dawns on him that the man is none other than Satan himself. What in blazes does Satan have to do with the multiverse? The benefactor now wants Kevin to become one of his shifters and offers him a luxurious life. He explains that he can give him the best possible version of Molly, who will go along with whatever he says. However, Kevin rejects the offer and instead starts seeking help from God. This enrages the benefactor, who begins yelling that Kevin will pay for this. Kevin continues to pray until the benefactor eventually disappears. Ashamed of his actions, he apologizes to Tina's parents and exits the CAF. The scene then shifts to 5 years later, with Kevin still trapped in this dystopian reality. He is living under a fake name because he is infamous everywhere as the Kevin who declined. In this world, constant conflicts and terrible human activities have ravaged most of the planet, and people have no idea how to make cool nicknames. After millions of people vanished, the benefactor has taken over the world. Most people now live in impoverished cities under the harsh rule of his officers. Meanwhile, Kevin does manual labor during the day to make a living. He often tries to recreate Bible verses from memory and secretly shares them with his friend Gabriel, even though spreading faith is illegal in this place. Gabriel is the only person he trusts and the only one who knows his true identity. Despite the challenges, Kevin remains hopeful that he will soon be reunited with his wife. One day, while returning home, Kevin encounters an old man named Russo, who is searching for his cat. It turns out Russo is the owner of a cinema where he broadcasts live channels from alternate realities. Kevin then books a session and begins watching people from different realities. Shortly after, he comes across several versions of Molly, each with a different occupation. He sees one such Molly wearing a necklace that he gave her during their marriage. This makes him realize that she's his real wife if there are really infinite branching timelines. No, she's probably not. After seeing her after so long, Kevin begins crying and touches the screen, but his time suddenly runs out. He asks for more time, but Russo claims that his schedule is fully booked and asks him to return in a few days. That evening, Kevin is at a grocery store when he sees a young boy walking alone in the aisle. Minutes later, the boy vanishes, causing Kevin to panic. He immediately alerts the mother, but she is confused and points out that her son is right next to her. Kevin insists that the boy has been swapped, but the woman thinks he's crazy and leaves. This incident reminds Kevin of when he was at a grocery store with Molly and their son. When the couple got distracted for a moment, their son vanished instantly and inexplicably. The police searched for him everywhere, but all their efforts were fruitless. In the present, Kevin suspects it was the work of shifters and believes that his son is still alive somewhere, maybe in a whole bunch of the other branching timelines. I don't know, Kevin doesn't seem to get this. Later, in the middle of the cold night, he begins rummaging for food in garbage heaps. He is then accidentally seen by his neighbor, Ranit, who invites him home for dinner. Upon arrival, Kevin is taken aback when Ranit and his wife call him by his real name. It turns out they know about his identity and know that he often writes Bible verses and gives them to Gabriel. Kevin gets scared and assumes they are shifters who will hurt him. However, Ranit apologizes and explains that he accidentally heard his conversation with Gabriel once. He expresses a desire to teach his daughters about religion, admitting that he knows little about it. Ranit then makes his daughters sing a Christian song, which moves Kevin to tears. Jesus is my friend. He's my only friend. As a result, he begins sharing Bible stories with the family and explains that God is simply testing their patience. He assures them that once it's all over, they will be blessed with double what they once had. At some point, an alarm goes off throughout the town. The family then turns on the news to discover that the benefactor is coming for another recruitment. The mayor warns everyone that if the benefactor wants anything from them, they must comply or face death. The next morning, Kevin returns to Russo's theater and finds him still looking for his cat. The old man then reveals that it has been 4 years, but he still hopes his pet will return someday. Kevin then sits on a bench and begins watching live channels of alternate universes. After observing several videos, he sees the real Molly and asks Russo to find her coordinates. However, the latter responds that it's useless because, without the deviator, he can't leave this world. Hearing this, Kevin recalls how the benefactor is coming to the city. So, he intends to take his deviator. At night, he meets with Gabriel and requests a gun to confront the benefactor. Gabriel thinks it's a suicide mission and argues that he can't shoot the demon. He decides to talk him out of it, but Kevin is resolute in his decision. In the end, Gabriel relents and gives him the gun. The next day, Kevin arrives before a CF where the benefactor is recruiting a guy. The place is guarded by the police, but he somehow manages to sneak inside. However, to his surprise, he walks into a hotel room instead of a CAF. He tries to leave, but the police outside fire at him, forcing him to retreat. Kevin becomes frustrated and starts smashing things around the room. He soon starts crying and rebukes God for testing him like this. All of a sudden, the benefactor appears and takes the gun from his hand. He also summons Gabriel and asks him if he gave Kevin the gun. However, Gabriel replies that he doesn't know this man. The benefactor then begins mocking Kevin for trusting his writings to such a coward. He says that what he has been doing for the past 5 years is meaningless and asks him to give up. The benefactor claims that God doesn't care about him and that he will only be free if he becomes a shifter. However, Kevin remains steadfast in his beliefs and refuses to sell his soul to the devil. All of a sudden, someone knocks on the door, and when Kevin comes out, he sees several armed officers. He sees them shooting at Ranit, so he rushes back to the room and urges Gabriel to take cover. Unfortunately, the latter is also shot in the gunfire, and Kevin finds a deviator in his hand, revealing that he was also a shifter. He quickly uses it to transport himself to another world. In the next scene, Kevin falls into a lake and soon realizes that this isn't his world. He then activates the device again and ends up in a mental facility. There, he is greeted by Dr. Gabriel, who asks him to return. When Kevin refuses to comply, many versions of Gabriel appear and start firing at him. But our hero somehow manages to escape from there and hides in a room. There, he comes across Tina, who seems unhinged and has suffered a lot. She quickly recognizes him and blames him for her situation. Tina then asks him to send her back to her parents, but the Gabriels appear again. So Kevin quickly activates the device and shifts to another world. This time, he arrives at the home of another Kevin, who is a shifter and living a lavish life. He tries to sneak and watch, but his doppelganger quickly recognizes him and points a gun at him. The man threatens to shoot him if he doesn't return the deviator. However, Kevin quickly activates the device and returns to the same dystopian world from before. He sees Ranette being taken away in an ambulance and finds that he was shot because of his involvement with Kevin. The police notice him, so he flees from there and arrives at Russo's theater. Kevin claims that he has the device and pleads with the old man to send him home quickly. Meanwhile, the police also arrive at the scene and plan to attack. But with Russo's help, Kevin manages to travel back to his original world. In the next scene, he finally meets his wife, who is shocked to see him after so long. She asks where he was, and Kevin answers that he was trapped in another world. Molly obviously doesn't understand, so he simply apologizes for neglecting her before and asks for another chance. Although she seems to still love him, Molly replies that she has found someone else now. Kevin desperately tries to convince her, but the benefactor suddenly appears and takes him away from there. Moments later, Kevin finds himself back at Russo's theater with officers surrounding him. The benefactor then brings Tina into this world too. He tells Kevin that although he acts almighty and talks about God, he is selfish deep down just like everyone else. He then holds Kevin at gunpoint and makes a final offer. He must choose between returning to Molly or sending Tina back to her family. He urges Kevin to be selfish and choose his own life rather than care about some random girl. Hearing this, Kevin finds himself in a desperate situation as he feels responsible for Tina's suffering. She is a little girl who has gone through so much after being separated from her family. While he is pondering, he sees that Russo has finally found his cat. This makes Kevin very happy, and he realizes that it is a sign of hope that he has been waiting for from God. Only Kevin could connect the dots between a cat and God. After this, he boldly declares that he wants Tina to return to her family. Once again, the benefactor is disappointed by Kevin's decision as he wanted him to be selfish and let evil win. Filled with rage, he grabs a gun and proceeds to shoot him. But all of a sudden, a divine force intervenes and Kevin is transported to another world. He ends up in a bar where Molly is drinking alone. Kevin approaches her and says that she is the most miserable looking woman he's ever seen. Molly is offended by the comment and explains that she just came from a 17-hour shift and she's exhausted. Kevin quickly apologizes, admitting that he just wanted to hit on her, but failed. The two then discuss their lives, and he finds that Molly is a single mother with a daughter. It turns out, Kevin doesn't exist in this universe, and she doesn't know him. However, he takes a chance and asks her out on a date, which she gladly accepts. A few years later, we see the couple getting married. Kevin states that although this isn't his original universe, it is his home now. Thus, he never has to worry about his son that disappeared at the beginning. I guess he has seen playing with his newborn son and adopted daughter, narrating how God has given him double what he once lost.